Please be seated. Okay, so there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room today. It's Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent. It's also St. Valentine's Day. And I gotta tell you, social media has been alive with clergy for the past few weeks, struggling how to deal with this incredible conundrum. How do you deal with this solemn day, starting the solemn season of Lent, and the day when we celebrate love? When we celebrate love. Do you ignore it, or do you deal with it? So I've decided to face my fears head on. Symbol of Valentine is what? The heart. And lots of red, which we're doing very well this evening. Lots of red. Cupid, with Cupid's bow and arrow, piercing the heart of someone, is a classic image of St. Valentine's. The piercing of the heart by Cupid is meant to soften someone's heart, to open their heart to the affection or the love interest of someone else, right? That's how we do it. We do it with roses or chocolates or cards. I remember in elementary school, everybody exchanged cards with everybody at Valentine's Day, right? And heaven help you if you didn't get one. That would just ruin your day. We do this to express our interest in someone, to make them aware of our care, our compassion, our interest, whatever it may be, in the hopes that they then in return will offer that affection and care back to us, a reciprocal arrangement. Scripture is full of heart imagery. For those of you who were at the annual meeting last month, I spoke a lot about the heart and about Scripture references to heart. I was speaking about this church being in the heart of the Van Aken district. In Deuteronomy, as in other passages, but in Deuteronomy, God calls the Hebrew people who are stubborn and referred to as stiff-necked to circumcise then the foreskin of your heart and do not be stubborn any longer. In other words, telling them to be open to being obedient to God and not just do what they want to do and worship idols and do all the things that were antithetical to God's law. In Proverbs, we hear, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own insight. It's a reminder that when we let God's into our heart, God will guide us versus our guiding ourselves, which invariably gets us into trouble. And then from the gospel for this evening, for Ash Wednesday, Matthew tells us, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. It's a question I think we might ponder as we start these 40 days of Lent. Where is our true treasure? And will we find our heart there? And is it a good treasure? Or is it not so good treasure? Moderns, like us, like to see the heart as the seat of our emotions. I get commentary from a few parishioners all the time when I talk about letting our hearts guide us in our faith journey, and they're like, the heart is too suspect, it's too sentimental. You know, we Episcopalians, we use our brain, we use our minds to make our decisions about our faith life, right? Not the heart. Valentine's Day is an emotional day, it's a sentimental day, it's a day of sweetness and love and desire and passion. Our brains don't align with that necessarily because our brains, at least we like to think, are rational and they're cool and they're dispassionate, very collected in our thoughts. And our brains are about making practical decisions in life. Our hearts are irrational. They're fickle, they're guided by desire and feelings, and they're prone to romance and to relationship. Scripture does seem to, in places, lift up this romanticized idea of relationship that at least we would say springs from the heart. God is seen and referred to as the husband of Israel. Jesus is referred to the groom, the bridegroom of the church. We talk about that all the time in the marriage liturgy, that Christ is the bridegroom and the church is the bride. And we undergird this, and you'll remember where this lyric is from. From heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride. The church's one foundation, that is undergirded, that understanding in that wonderful hymn. In the book of the prophet Hosea, God is understood to be the lover of Israel. The lover of Israel. Hosea says, therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. We might imagine God courting Israel with a dozen roses in one hand and a heart-shaped box of Godiva chocolates in the other. So with all of this talk about the heart and intimate relationship in the Bible, maybe Ash Wednesday and St. Valentine's Day are not so dissonant, landing on the same day, the first time in 75 years, by the way. Maybe they're complementary to one another. After all, Ash Wednesday is a Christian holy day. It is named after a 3rd century Roman saint associated with the tradition of courtly love. And certainly, Christianity is all about love. We define God as love. We speak about God's love for us, which is the most powerful agent in all of creation. Valentine's Day is about love, about tender hearts, pierced by an arrow, or sweet words, or sweet candy, or sweet-smelling flowers. Hearts beating with love, God as lover, Jesus as husband. Seems like a hand-in-glove relationship, right? Perfect fit. Except that the ancients had a different idea about all this. They regarded the heart as the seat of intellect, not the mind. For the ancients, the heart was where all of the intellectual decisions came from. The emotions came from the bowels. But think about that. We have visceral responses to emotional situations, don't we? Fear, passion, just unexpected events. We have this feeling, we call it, it's in our gut, but it's a visceral response, and the ancients recognized that. So they felt that the emotions came from your bowels and that your intellect came from your heart. So when God calls the Israelites to circumcise the heart, it was done so that the Israelites would give intellectual assent to the relationship that God wanted to have with them. That relationship God wanted with them. And I would posit that we are already filled with God's love, being made in God's image, and when we live our lives correctly, that love should flow from us, from God, through us to others. It's to circumcise our heart is to break down the walls, if you will, the barriers that kind of keep that love pent up, and from us even from recognizing its presence. So that's a paradigm shift in understanding for we moderns, right? I suspect it's a hard sell, too. I mean, I love you from the bottom of my bowels just doesn't resonate as I love you from the bottom of my heart. I mean, if somebody came up to you and said that, you'd look at them like really strange, right? And I definitely think Hallmark or American Greetings is going to have a problem making cards from that saying. Ash Wednesday is about love. When you get right down to it, when you distill it, it's about love. Non-sentimental love, but authentic love. Love that calls us away from the false idols that are always whispering seductively to us to follow them. Love that compels us to soften our hearts, to open our hearts to accept God as our lover. God is our lover. I just think that's a beautiful image. It's why in Lent we are called to these disciplines, among others, of self-denial. the disciplines of self-denial. We do it, we do chocolate, or we do alcohol, or we do caffeine or something, but there are many other disciplines that we can engage in. We are called not to be enslaved to those things that try to control our bodies, those addictions, those things that we worship, and that we when our body craves them, we give in to giving our body every desire, every whim, because ultimately that's idolatry. That's idolatry. We are reminded that authentic sweetness of life doesn't come from candy and chocolates, but it comes from God's care for us. God's desire us to be whole and healthy and to lead holy lives. Self-denial reminds us that the wellness of our spirit is critical, and it is what puts our hearts back in right relationship with God. In a few moments, at the imposition of ashes, you will hear the words, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." These aren't seen as the most edifying words by many Christians. We can tell on Ash Wednesday by rather, I'm glad you're all here, but there are a lot of people who aren't here because they just don't want to hear about their mortality. We are a culture that denies illness and aging and death. We don't like death. And so to hear words that remind us that our bodies are going to decompose after we die and go back to the dust from whence they were created by God isn't a message that people want to hear. So they stay away. Yet this poignant reminder that we are dust tells us that we must live life fully because life is precious. It's a precious gift from God, so God calls us to live it fully. As C.S. Lewis stated, "Die before you die, you have no chance afterwards." Die before you die, you have no chance afterwards. And I quote this a lot in funeral homilies because the reality is we get so enslaved to our addictions, to feeding the cravings of our body, to all those things that diminish the quality of life that we have. They become burdens, they become balls and chains on us that we die to this life. Even though we're still breathing and taking sustenance, we're dead to life. Lewis said, get rid of all that stuff. Live your life fully, to life, l'chaim. Do it before you die, because once you're dead, your opportunity to do that is over. So in other words, die to those behaviors and those beliefs and burdens that plague us, those things that cause illness, anxiety and enmity and hypocrisy and bigotry and all those things that rob us from being compassionate and humble and joyful and hopeful in life. These burdens that we carry cause us to die to the holiness of life that God desires us to have. They rob us of its very preciousness. They are the rust and moth, to paraphrase Matthew, that rot body and soul. In Lent, we're called to focus on the way of love, of loving God with all that we have, with all our heart, mind, and soul, of authentically loving our neighbor as ourself, regardless of who our neighbor is, of loving ourselves enough to honor the gift of our bodies and the gift of our souls, that we don't damage them with all of those things that prevent us from having a healthy life. Of circumcising our hearts so that we may give intellectual assent to having God as our lover. These are the gifts that get stored in heaven, I believe. They show where the true treasure of our heart is, where the true treasure and value of life is. So yes, Valentine's is about love, and I don't mean to deride it. I hope that you got some chocolates or flowers or a card today, or that your beloved is going to take you out to dinner, or maybe did last night, or express their care for you in some way. That's important. But ultimately, Ash Wednesday is about greater love. It is about greater love. It is about the source of all love. And it is about the love that gave us Jesus, who gives us life and gives it abundantly.